I'm going to talk about neurofeedback in the aging brain, what we can expect, and I want to say I'm talking about this because Seaburn asked me to. I'll do almost anything Seaburn wants me to do.
I don't make outrageous requests.
Not often.
So I want to talk about first what we can't expect, and then real quickly go through what's happened with the aging brain in terms of cognitive performance, talk quickly about EEG and aging, and then talk about a little bit that there is about neurofeedback for healthy aging brains and a little bit of research that there is for neurofeedback for mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And I want to start with this thing really quickly. They did some research. This was a study done at Stanford and published in the Harvard Business Review. And what they did was they made up reviews of restaurants. And there were reviews that came allegedly from consumers and from experts. And then half of each pile were way positive, and then the other half were more measured. And then they looked at the outcomes. And what they found was that the less assured expert prompted higher ratings of the consumers than the certain expert. People who read the review by a tentative professional were more likely to pay money for that restaurant. And so the takeaway message is we don't necessarily mistrust confident experts, but we're more persuaded by experts who are less confident, right? And so in that spirit, I want to talk about what we can't expect from neurofeedback. And so we can't expect that neurofeedback is going to fix our aging backs. I'm going to read that. Can you all read the punchline?
Yes, I do.
Can Eddie come out and throw his gun and back out? And it won't help our sagging body parts. And it won't help libido either. What makes you think a dwindling libido can't be very sexy in a man? And it won't act as a fountain of youth for the inner child. My inner child just turned 45. 65. Well, I'm hopeful. Or make us look dorky. Notice the pronoun that I'm using. Throughout this talk, you'll only hear me say us. And so far, actually, it doesn't look like neurofeedback helps with memory. As I get older, I find I rely more and more on sticky notes to remind me. So while maybe the major complaint about the aging brain is memory, the research so far doesn't suggest that it helps a lot with memory. Okay. Now, another thing that we can't expect aging brains to work on. Ed Hamlin and I started a business 5 or 6 years ago. It's no surprise that none of you in this audience have heard anything about it. Stay Sharp Mental Fitness Center. We got a cool logo. We made a cool website. We actually get visitors to our cool website. I spoke at that time to probably 350, 450 aging adults about this, about using neurofeedback and other approaches to improve their cognitive performance. And people were jumping down in their seats. They were so excited. This was the greatest thing that there ever was. Why didn't they know more about it? It was amazing. But nobody came. What we were offering was neurofeedback, which we call the EEG-guided brain training, and neurocognitive exercise. So everybody would do one of the brain training programs, and motor timing and balance training, and then we were doing workshops on nutrition, stress management, sleep, lifestyle, and individualized coaching. And literally, I decided to get started, we would just charge $100 a month. So you could come as often as you wanted.
Oh my goodness.
4 days a week from
I'm
9
pretty
to 12.
old.
Sign people up here.
Well, I thought maybe it was Rhode Island. And Ed, although he never said this, I think he thought it was how I spoke. So Asheville is a different kind of community than Rhode Island. Lots of retired, well-heeled retired people there. He said, well, just wait. So he gave a lot of talks too at the college. What's it called?
College for seniors?
College for Seniors. And same thing, nobody came to his party either. So one thing we can't expect are people to train, and if there's time, I'd like to generate some ideas, right, on how to get people
My
to...
office is full of these people. I live in the Berkshires. They're
You
all old.
live in the Berkshires.
It's partly a
Well, Rhode
demographic.
Island has the largest percentage of aging population in the country except for Florida.
What does?
Rhode Island, where our center
Well,
is.
we could talk later.
Maybe not.
But they accept each other.
All right, so let's talk about brain aging. The brain weight and volume decreases. That happens more in the frontal and temporal lobes, which is not surprisingly where you see the dysfunction in many forms of dementia, probably due to reduced connections. Here's some slides on brain volume. So you can see it is not a very nice trend. You can see this is hippocampal volume, also not a very nice trend.
I forget what that's for.
Not surprisingly, in the visual cortex, right, there's much less.
Larry, are these the data you presented in these talks?
And here's what we know about function. Research shows decline in your ability to encode new memories and attention and concentration in working memory, processing speed, visual perception, spatial information, numeric and verbal ability. This is kind of a sad chart here.
Shoot me now.
Shoot ourselves now.
We have the Kool-Aid is out.
So this shows you, over time what's happening with different cognitive functions, and certain areas functioning is pretty well preserved. Certain areas not so much. My daughter is 28, so her deal is she's got 2 more years. In 2 more years, her frontal lobe will be fully formed, right? And then she starts to decline everywhere. Focused attention scores across the lifespan. Problem-solving speed across the lifespan. Number of problem-solving errors.
Okay, now the solution. Come on.
So the good news is some things get better, like vocabulary, contextual memory, pattern recognition, reflective decision-making.
Yay.
Some things are maintained, like autobiographical memory, theory of mind, your knowledge base, emotional processing, things that are more or less automatic. But this is back to the not so good news. Look at these slides showing structure in the dendritic arbor of a parameter cell. And so you can see the reduced complexity there.
You're all wine fearless.
There's been some research on EEG changes with normal aging. So most people know about the slowing of the peak alpha frequency, reduced alpha blocking, decreased overall power. The regional distribution of alpha remains the same. There doesn't look as if there's hemispheric selective age effects. Decreased amplitude in the delta and theta bands, and trends for decreased amplitude in beta and alpha, especially in faster alpha, which is not surprising if the peak alpha frequency is decreasing with age. Women have less delta and more beta activity as they age compared to men. And the data don't suggest that with so that there's more of the decline that happens in normal aging. No, it looks like a different process, and you'll see that in a minute. I couldn't find, and maybe some of you know, but I couldn't find studies that look at the correlation between the degree of decline in cognitive function and the degree of change in EEG activity. So you would think that they would be related, but I couldn't find actually any studies that showed that, which is not true when you look at dementia. The changes that we know happen with dementia, more severe in EEG, more severe in function. With Alzheimer's disease, there's increased delta and theta and decreased alpha and beta power. So notice that's different than in normal aging, right? There was increases in the slow activity, decrease in the average mean frequency, and as I said, that's not identical to normal aging. And these findings are correlated with cognitive performance, which you'll see in a minute.
And that excessive slowing or increased slowing is associated, as I understand it, with less blood flow. That there is a correlation between that slower stuff and less blood flow.
Well,
less,
you know what,
no,
I don't actually know if that's the case in dementia, but in general, more theta means less perfusion. So one really interesting study that I just wanted to talk about in just a tiny bit of detail is a study that looked at state fragmentation in EEG. And so they looked at 31 demented or impaired elderly, 30 healthy elderly, and 35 non-controls. And they were looking at essentially microstates in the EEG. I don't know the technical stuff about how they did this. David probably does. But what they found was a significant increase in the Alzheimer's group of very short microstates. So very rapid shifting in and out of these microstates, and a reduction in how long they lasted. And that the reduction in the duration of these states was correlated with degree of cognitive function. And
What is a microstate?
I'm sorry?
What is a microstate?
Probably some consistency in it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Of the brain being in a consistent state in terms of, reduced variance and being stable at some amount of something.
Little bursts of various forms of
I
activity.
said I'd do anything that Seaburn asked me to do, but I outdid it at the last minute. So I don't, I didn't really get into the details of this.
No, with microstates must be little bursts of coherent activity across.
I'm sure it is.
That changes
I'm
them,
sure
yeah.
it uses measures of
Similar
coherence.
coherence.
So this is the work that comes out of the NYU Brain Research Center. This is Leslie Pritchard's work on early Alzheimer's detection. What they did was they brought in a whole bunch of people who had subjective complaints of memory, and they carefully tested them. And they used only those people who had no memory problems. So their memory scores were within normal limits. And they did quantitative EEG. And then they followed the folks for 10 years. And the baseline quantitative EEGs, they sorted out after they followed the people into the group that declined and the group that did not decline into mild cognitive impairment and dementia. So the top row is showing the group who did not decline, and the bottom row is showing the group who did decline, right? It's hard to miss the difference there. And then they looked at connectivity failures, and then they took the range of people from normal controls to people with mild cognitive impairment all the way down to moderate to severe dementia, and you can see it's almost a perfect association between degree of decline and degree of connectivity, especially in alpha and beta. This was replicated in another sample in Stockholm. So what we might expect with neurofeedback, I looked at the research. There are 3 studies that have been done with normal aging. One was done by Angelakis et al., another study done by Elena Festa and colleagues at Brown, and then a French study that I just found yesterday. One study was people at risk for decline, and actually they used the Pritchett criteria of essentially excessive frontal or temporal theta. They selected those individuals, considering them at risk. And then 3 studies with dementia. And Tanju Somelli actually sent me his data so I can show you those. So this was a study done in France with elderly subjects. They were randomly assigned. They got 4 neurofeedback sessions to increase alpha and low beta, decrease theta. They used a relaxation control group and a weightless control group. And the neurofeedback was increasing alpha. The result was that the alpha theta ratio increased in the neurofeedback group, but there was no memory improvement. Now 4 sessions, right? Not so much. Okay. Angelakis and all, they were focusing on peak alpha frequency, which declines as we age. And their question was, can aging adults increase their alpha speed, and if so, would processing speed, executive function, and memory improve? And so they did an RCT. The controls were increasing alpha amplitude. Interesting kind of control. And then the experimental group was trained to increase the alpha frequency. And this had only 6 subjects, so they're obviously only reporting trends. 31, 35, and 36 sessions in the neurofeedback group. So this now they're doing some more neurofeedback. So this is the increase in peak alpha frequency, and that's a pretty nice. That's a pretty nice trend.
What is what? Good to know.
There are 3 different subjects.
Been grim to know.
Each line. So the alpha frequency is on the vertical axis, and then the session number is on the horizontal.
What location is this?
I don't actually remember. It's in the back.
In the back.
Yeah, they're training. I think it was PZ, but I'm not certain. Maybe occipital. And this is the alpha amplitude increase group. Also nice. What isn't so nice is the outcomes. Now remember, these are, there are no stats here because there's only 3 subjects in the neurofeedback. But there are as many things that got worse as got better. And interestingly, memory, 3 of 4 variables got worse.
They're increasing the alpha speed in posterior. That's like a conceptual skill. I can think memory, you want to train temporal. So some of the things is you actually you're focused on a different skill set.
Well, they were looking at processing speed. That was their main thing that they were interested in. But if you're working with old folks like me, you got to be interested in memory. Okay, so at Brown, 2 members of the faculty in the psychology department received a grant from the Alzheimer's Association to look at neurofeedback for Alzheimer's, and the first stage was with healthy elderly. So this is a funded random controlled trial using a sham treatment control with 2 phases. First was healthy elderly, and then the second was with Alzheimer's subjects. The Alzheimer's portion is not yet, the data has not yet been released. Actually, Elena was planning to give me the data, and her mom is now sick and dying, so I hope to be able to present that data to you, but don't. Interestingly, Elena and Bill are research neuropsychologists who have done a lot of neuropsychological testing and research with aging adults and Alzheimer's. And they developed through their neuropsychological studies the hypothesis that much of the problem had to do with connectivity front to back on the right side. And so they published 4 or 5 studies that led to their coming to this hypothesis, and then they said, this may be the first time in history that that people were led to neurofeedback by their data and not their patients. But they said, maybe we could change that. And they started to look around and they came to neurofeedback. So their hypothesis was that neurofeedback would do that. They used BrainMaster 4-channel Z-score training, C3, C4, P3, P4. And so when you do that training, you're training both amplitude and power and coherence. The sham group got somebody else's EEG. And so the first study was healthy elderly, and they found some stuff. Now, they only did, how many subjects? Did I say that here? How many sessions? Not a lot of sessions.
8, 10 minutes.
8 to 10
So they're not doing a ton. But even with that, they did get some results. So they reported enhanced processing within the posterior cortical systems, but they did not see improvement in executive function. And I'm going to skip over all of this because we're probably almost at the end of my time. So this was a study that was just published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease so recently that the authors didn't even have the reprints to send me. And what they did was they selected people who were at risk, as I said, based on Pritchard's criteria. They had 14 subjects with abnormal theta power, and they were randomly assigned to either an experimental group that got theta inhibit training, only auditory feedback, so when theta went below the threshold, they got a beep. And the control group just got random beeps. And the results were that the experimental group showed some change in the EEG and some behavioral measures. Their abstract does not say what those are, and I couldn't get the paper. But so did the control group. So the EEG changed and memory scored in the control group. So beep. Marvin Berman, John Fredericks did a study with frontotemporal dementia. All the subjects had a diagnosis of dementia. And they had selection criteria, so they were people who were, severe enough to be of interest, but not so severe that it wouldn't make sense to train with them. They had waitlist controls. They did 30 to 40 sessions of DVD feedback. The protocols were individualized based on the quantitative EEG. I could not tell how they did it, but this was the typical protocol, inhibiting 0 to 8 and 22 to 36 and rewarding high alpha and essentially beta. And they found improvements in verbal memory, visual memory, the behavior rating inventory, executive function, the IVA, some trends in the MMSE, in other areas. Executive function measures, some of them did not improve. Here, there's a poster that they did, and what's interesting is that that there was a overall effect that suggested that the less severe people improved more. Here are their data. So one of the questions that, that I ask myself is it worth it? And I think we don't know yet. The verbal fluency is interesting. That certainly matters to people, right? How easily they can find their words, how easy it is for them to converse. It's one of the major frustrations and reasons for distress. So I take that a heck of a lot more seriously than an improved IVA score. Who gives a shit, really? But being able to talk to your friends, that matters. And so this may make a difference. Just quickly, these are coming from Tanju, who worked with a number of people with a variety of forms of dementia, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's.
Very helpful, thank you, that's great.
Sorry.
Like after that speed reading.
So, now these folks got a lot of sessions, right? Between 18 and 195. he is reporting improvement. No, there are no controls here, so this is really just an open trial.
Who is it? Who's
Tanju Sermeli in Turkey.
Neuropsychiatrist.
But he saw lots of improvements on things that matter. And
What kind of
improvement.
training is this? What type of training was this?
What's he doing?
What's he doing?
It's neurofeedback, it's cue-based,
Thank
individualized
you.
neurofeedback.
Always meticulously done.
And so they did see an overall improvement in the mini-mental status examination questionnaire for orientation, attention and calculation, recall, that's a good one.
3 out.
In language.
Turkish.
Here are some of the stats. This is the clinical global impression or improvement scale. And so, you know, there's some significant improvement there with an N of 9. I think I probably should stop here. So, in summary, we have only preliminary evidence that neurofeedback can help. And I think we have preliminary evidence that if it's going to help, it's going to take a lot of sessions. This is not going to be 20 sessions and you're a happy camper. It looks like it can help with some aspects of cognitive decline and dementia. There's actually less evidence that can help with healthy aging. But what's not clear to me is it worth it?
Okay, and we've got about 3 minutes, so discuss quickly.
So a couple, one of the questions about Tanju's, often he does a heavy metals challenge and he makes relations. I'd be curious whether these cases also include that.
They did, and they also included changes in medication. It's the messiness of the data.
Yeah.
But a lot of that stuff was done before. So he would work with them to try to get them stable. But there still were med changes.
So I've taken on several and have at least 5 that I can look at, including my sister actually did some beta reset and a bunch of other things with all these people, Q-based. Hard to identify the core deficit changes, and I'm just using anecdotal, of course, but the thing that was so pronounced when you talk about the verbal fluency, all of them interact far better after doing neurofeedback. One woman, and this is just typical, she goes to church. 5 people walked up to her 4 weeks after starting neurofeedback and go, oh my God, what are you doing? 5 different people walked up. People are not noticing, so that closed in, how they get closed in, they come out. Now, they have their deficits. I have pictures, the formation, how you have the different pictures. 2 of them could not identify animals. Not, is that a dog? What is it? Is it an animal? I don't know.
Oh, wow.
Those actually very, very slowly started to improve, but the thing that was so dramatic was affect and the ability to interact, and that is so big, and it's such a clear picture, but the other question is, can you stop? And that's the part
Age
I have.
is a degenerative problem, right?
So I'm telling them all, get a
So
machine.
don't stop, yes.
Okay, one more question quickly, and then we're... Nobody else?
No, I would just say just quick one. I worked in a home system with a woman who was training her Alzheimer's father, who was a wanderer. So there's a lot of problems with keeping him at home, and she was able to dramatically reduce his anxiety, and he was able eventually to make a transition into a group home where he doesn't have to be collared or whatever that is, that they do to people who wander, and he's the most agreeable person. He has Alzheimer's, but she got rid of he was able to stop being as agitated about his own condition, and it made life much better for him.
There is a relationship between anxiety and working memory and attention. So if you reduce anxiety, you would expect for the other 2 to
You would.
improve as well.
Okay,
I
everyone,
know, we saw that.
10:30, we have a break now. Yes?
Okay, remember to take your cups and glasses into the kitchen?
On that note, I just want to give some information to everyone because of what you just said. There's a new company shoe out from GTX Shoes. It's amazing for Alzheimer's, wanderers, anybody who has a wandering issue. It's got a GPS in it, and you can find them like that.
What's the shoe?
The shoe. So you don't let them have any other kinds of shoes, and it's awesome.
You don't tell where you are.
Well, I don't know. It's not my product.